Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I am your host, Natalie Brown, and thanks so much for joining me as we continue to dive into the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and using sound for health and wellness. I appreciate you listening and supporting this podcast, and please feel free to reach out with input, comments, questions, ideas for guests. I would love to hear from you. Check out my website, soundshealstudio.com, and you can contact me from there. This podcast is sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa in Sarasota, Florida. You can check them out at theomshop.com and see their large collection of singing bowls, chakra drums, Zen tubes, and all kinds of sonic tools, as well as crystals, Himalayan salt lamps, energy decor, meditation gear, and all kinds of stuff. They also have a great blog and learning center, and please support them as they support their clients. They offer such good guidance when you're looking into this vibrational medicine field, and I've been so lucky to work with them and teach classes there. They truly lead with the best intentions and offer an amazing holistic experience. Thank you to the Om Shop and Spa for sponsoring this podcast. This episode is with Rich Goodhart, a world music multi-instrumentalist, composer, and recording artist, as well as a shamanic sound healing practitioner, a poet, writer, instrument builder, and also Qigong and Tai Chi instructor. He's composed, produced, arranged, and engineered 8 albums, and also is the author of 2 books, including The Sound Inside the Sound. He's collaborated with Ginsberg, Jon Anderson of Yes, Deepak Chopra, and so many others. We talk about his background, his early influences, and explorations of music of the world, getting to study with master musicians of Africa, India, America, and Indonesia, getting to collaborate and study with many of his idols and inspirations. We also talk about how he's brought together spiritual work, shamanic work, Qigong, Tai Chi, into sound work as well. We also talk about his passion and dedication to integrity in the sound field, encouraging people to have healthy discussions and exploration, as well as research. So please enjoy this conversation with Rich Goodhart. Well, I'd love to start with your background, your sound background as a child, and early influences that shaped your life as a musician and a person.
Okay. How early to go? I've been asked this question other times, and probably the answers are not all the same. I think they're all truthful, but what I remember in the moment may be different. But this came up recently in conversation with somebody that when I was a young boy, my dad, particularly on the weekends, seems to me like it was Sundays, maybe whatever the weather was, and if we were inside, he played records, and he had a stack of singles. One that stands out the most in my mind is "Mac the Knife" by Louis Armstrong's version of it, and but then he also had a number of albums, and in particular, he had a couple of Herb Alpert in the Tijuana Brass albums. Those Herb Alpert albums, they were very interesting instrumental albums. A lot of cool little quirks in it and rhythmic things. I think it was on the song "A Taste of Honey." There's a point where the band comes to a pause, and then the drum comes back in, doot, 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 and then they kick in with horns and everything. And I would stand there by the sofa, holding onto the arm of the sofa, and when that pause came, I would try to jump just when the drums come in and like stomp to the drum coming in, and it would upset my dad because it would make the record skip, you know. Uh, but I was then I was being drawn into rhythm and into music and trying to, you know, catch the phrasings and things. And so, you know, I would credit my dad, which I probably haven't really done much, but credit him with really turning me on to music early on. And then my uncle, who is actually not a blood relative uncle, but we called him Uncle Chuck and Aunt Grace, and he was a keyboard player and would play weddings and clubs and things. And on the holidays, we'd go to their house Christmas around Christmas time, and he had a piano and an organ in the house. And after dinner, the adults would sing, sit around the piano and sing, and they had a camp on a lake, and they had a Wurlitzer, the classic Wurlitzer electric piano that he had up there. And that there was a point where I got really interested in that, and he would just turn it on and, you know, show me a couple of things, and then leave me alone, and I could sit there for an hour or so and just find my way around the keyboard. So that's the earliest stuff. But jumping up a little bit into early teenage years and into the classic progressive rock 70s, that music really caught me, particularly the music of Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the 70s Yes, not the 80s Yes. There's a
Right.
very significant difference there.
Yeah.
You know, albums like Close to the Edge and Tales from Topographic Oceans, you know, a double LP with 4 tracks on it.
I mean, they just don't make music like that anymore. Everything's so kind of compact and short. I mean, those were real soundscapes in a way, and I mean, 20-minute journeys. You know.
Yeah, yeah, very much.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, again, I wasn't thinking about sound healing or anything at that point, but they were journeys. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
you went on a trip with them through the music,
Mm-hmm.
through the 20 minutes or so, or the, you know, 80 minutes of the entire album.
Yeah.
And so I was drawn to that consciousness altering aspect of music, where it could really take you into other realms, and not just, it wasn't fantasy either. Um, there was sort of this debate at times between them, between Yes and Genesis, and um, you know, a debate amongst some of my friends, fans of both of them, but which was the better band.
Mm-hmm.
And I always came down on the side of Yes, and not a question of musicianship. I mean, arguments could be made there, but I think in the long run, I see it that Genesis was much more of a fantasy band, and a lot of progressive rock gets kind of labeled as that. You know, this is sort of escapist fantasy, um, and to me that doesn't hold up. You know, 40 years later, I'm not interested in, you know, teenage escapist fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you know what Yes was tuning into, and really under the guidance of Jon Anderson, was a more transcendent spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was like the sort of the Pied Piper that led me astray into these realms, into music and sound as a healing force, as a consciousness force, as an awakening of spirituality and wisdom and insight, and into shamanic realms.
And how did that influence your playing at that age? Were you mostly playing keyboard in bands, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I was playing keyboards, um, mostly in bands. We had a piano in the house that I was able to mess around with and get interested in, and then I convinced my dad to buy an organ, electric organ, you know, one of those kind of home units, not a gigging
Mm-hmm.
organ, but it came with a number of lessons, and I had probably a dozen lessons on the organ, and then connected with a friend down the street who was also a huge Yes and progressive rock fan, who was playing guitar, and so
Mm-hmm.
we started hanging out and learning things and just playing them, and then creating bands, which mostly played in the basement. Had
Mm-hmm.
had a few gigs as a teenager, but the majority of the time we just spent learning things. And we began right at the beginning. Smoke on the Water
Mm-hmm.
and Led Zeppelin tunes. The simpler Led Zeppelin tunes,
Sure.
Whole Lotta Love or Heartbreaker or something.
Mm-hmm.
Things that you could just learn with almost no skill. And then we, as we moved through that, we started uh, learning Allman Brothers songs.
Mm-hmm.
In Memory of Elizabeth Reed was a classic to do that really took you through some interesting chords and breaks and changes and things. And we worked our way up to doing Genesis and Yes and King Crimson and all that stuff.
And then what's really amazing is you've been able to work with a lot of your idols and musical people that you've looked up to. Of course, Jon Anderson included. Isn't that right? That you did
Yes,
a collaboration
yes,
with him. So how amazing to be a teenager and look up to somebody and then later collaborate. And I believe your tabla player, the person you look to as well. So let's kind of fill in the blanks of how you got to where you were, that you were able to collaborate with these people and approach these people and connect, as well as all the instruments from around the world that you play, probably ones that if you said their name, people wouldn't know what they are. What kind
yeah.
of,
There's a few of those.
yeah, what kind of made you pick up certain instruments, or are you just one of those people that picks one up and you'll figure out how to play it?
um, yeah, I guess I tend to be someone who picks something up and then figures out how to play it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there are times years ago when I would get a new instrument and I would say, "This is it. I have enough now. I'm not going to get any more instruments.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
gonna focus on just mastering these
Mm-hmm.
7 different instruments." And that lasts for about 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's something else I want.
Yeah.
And and sometimes I think, I've gotten down on myself and thought, well, I don't have the focus, and I'm scattered, and I just I should actually at Cal Arts, when I was at the California Institute of the Arts, my tabla teacher there, one day he was getting mad at us students and said, you guys, you all have a problem. You don't want to focus. You want to do this and you want to do that and you want to do that. Yeah, that's why we're at Cal Arts, because we can do all
Yeah.
these things.
Yep.
And so, but I've come to see, that's my strength. That's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I play the instruments reasonably well. Um, I do albums and record with them, and I have this repertoire of voices. And yes, I was a keyboardist first, and then I got interested in percussion, tabla.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you mentioned that the band Oregon
Mm-hmm.
was. We had a great radio station in the area, WRPI. It comes out of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, engineering college nearby. And there was a time, I think going back to the 60s through the 70s and 80s, they were considered one of the best radio stations in the country. And they had, they had people that played all this alternative music.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those bands that I got turned on through that radio station was the group Oregon, which some people call the godfathers of the New Age. Kind of not very fair to, to say that.
Mm-hmm.
They were all very highly trained musicians, creating this kind of new texture and sound. In a lot of ways, it was very much jazz. You're probably familiar with Oregon, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but the real element that made them unique, in my experience, was Colin Walcott, who played sitar and tabla,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a lot of other world and percussion instruments. And I so that led me to my interest in world percussion in tabla in particular. And through RPI, actually, I met someone there who was DJing there who played tabla, and he had an extra set that he loaned me and gave me some basic lessons on it. And and then, as I got into that, I thought, I really want to take this further. And then Oregon was coming to town for a concert, and I thought, well, hey, I'm going to go backstage and find Colin and ask him if he knows anybody. And within um, 50 miles or so, I am about 60 miles from the center of town of Woodstock. So I
Mm.
figured, down to Woodstock or somewhere in upstate New York, maybe he knows someone that can give me lessons. So at intermission of their concert, I just went off and wandered backstage, and it was perfect because there was nobody there. There were no security guards to
Hmm.
stop me or anything. And I'm walking through this hall backstage, this hallway, and I hear voices coming out of a room, and I hear it sounds like the band. So I'm kind of slow down to approach the room, and I figure, catch my breath. How am I going to walk in on these guys? And so I'm approaching the room, and Colin just steps out of the room. For what reason, I don't know. But he just walks
Hmm.
out, and suddenly, in an instant, there I am standing alone in the hallway with Colin.
Hmm.
And that's an example of a number of things, but just that was like the most immediate example of having an intent and then having the world or whatever just presented, here you are.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you wanted.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I asked him, I talked to him, told him why I was looking for him, and he thought for a moment and he said, well, no, I can't really think of anybody, but I live out near Oneonta, and if you want my number, I'll give you my number.
Wow.
And it's like, well, okay, if you can't think of anybody else, if
Better
you're
than
the only
you.
person, yeah, anybody better than you, anybody that I idolize more than you, I guess I'll take your number.
Mm-hmm.
And where he lived is about 75, 78 miles from me. And when they came back from that tour, it was, I think that was October or November when I met him. And then in January, shortly after the new year, he was back home. And I began studying with him for the better part of a year.
Mm.
It turned out to be the last year of his life.
That's right. Did he pass away on their tour abroad?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they were on the Autobahn in Germany in November,
Mm.
and there was a crash of the tour bus.
Wow. What a shock, I'm sure, in that part of your life. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
very
mean,
much.
it was a really interesting time. I mean, that's really when the upswing of world music and just this rise of world music, which the word itself is interesting because what world, what culture, and I guess anything but yours, but, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. Sometimes I say that. People will talk about what I'm doing, and I say, well, I'm just a white boy in upstate New York, but that's part of the world too.
hmm yeah. Do
Yeah,
you consider yourself a world musician? Is that what you would call yourself?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. For lack of any other term,
Yeah.
I think there's a line in my bio that I've been using for quite a number of years that I work with world music in non-traditional forms.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. If you're not in that particular culture and that particular tradition, if you're playing that instrument, it's going to be in non-traditional forms. Yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense.
and I've studied in traditional forms. I've
Mhm.
studied tabla traditionally. I've studied African drumming traditionally. Um, when I was at Cal Arts, some of my friends, and I'm not putting them down at all, but they would adopt. Uh, when they would in the Indian classes, they'd be wearing those Indian
Mm.
shirts with the little
Mhm.
collars and
Sure.
being all Indian. And then when we'd be doing the African thing, they'd be putting on the African dashiki, is that what it's called? Those Nigerian shirts,
Mm-hmm.
and they would be adopting, those aspects of the culture while they were doing that music. And I could never do that. It just didn't feel right. It wasn't, I didn't have anything against them doing it, but for me, I felt like, well, I'm not that. I'm not one of them. I'm honored to be studying with these people, and I'll honor the music, but I could never. I just, it was not in me. That was not my path to really adopt any of these particular cultures.
Right. Right. Well, I'm curious how the shift happened for you, and I guess how it influences you as a musician, because you really um, dove into shamanic and Qigong studies. When did that happen, and how did that shift you as a person?
Well, when I was about 20, I really got into reading spirituality. The first book I read was The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts. And rapidly, uh, that year, that summer, on through the next several years, I read many things, but including was the Carlos Castaneda books.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the first 5 books pretty much right in order. As soon as I finished one, I went out and got the next one. And you're probably familiar with those as
Mm-hmm.
well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that really introduced me to that whole realm of shamanism. And reading those books, it just seemed so natural. I felt like I was in that world, or that world was in some way uh, waiting for me or calling to me in some manner. And I didn't pursue that. I didn't like head off to find Don Juan in the desert or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've since connected with people who have studied with him directly, and that's a whole other story. But his name is different and everything. But there really was a person. I know that there are books that purport to debunk all of Carlos's things and say that this was all made up, but that's not true. Um, there's a lot that was made up or expanded upon in Carlos's imagination, but he really did go both to Arizona and down to Mexico and meet with this um, master, uh, whatever you want to call him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just hesitating around the word shaman because he didn't really call himself a shaman. But
Right.
um, so where am I going with that? That was the door that opened me up to shamanism. And though I didn't pursue it directly for a long time, I did have experiences on my own that related to that realm, very shamanic, alternate perception sorts of experiences, including a lot happening with the dream world. I think if anything from the books that I actually did spend some time practicing were some of the instruction around being able to wake up in your dreams and have lucid dreaming. So that was partly instigated by those books and partly just seemed to happen naturally. And and then I also, in my 20s, got turned on to Tai Chi, became aware of that, and in my late 20s, learned a form of Tai Chi, the most common, the Chen Man Ching version of the Yang style form. I learned that and practiced that for a while, and over time added other Qigong practices. And Tai Chi actually being a form of Qigong,
Mm-hmm.
Qigong being a more general, broader term. And so there was that I was developing practice and practicing. There was the shamanism, which I ended up studying with, taking some workshops with different people. And then there was the sound healing. And my teacher that I met for that, my primary teacher, a woman, Sarah Benson, who is known those who know her as sound healing's best kept secret. Also a teacher of teachers. She was Jonathan Goldman's first sound healing teacher, and most of us know Jonathan or know of his work. Um, and so I had these three different streams of spiritual study, energetic, spiritual consciousness, whatever you want to call all these things. There was the sound, there was the Qigong, and there was the shamanism. And somewhere along the way, in my time teaching at the Omega Institute, I've been on core faculty there teaching in different ways since about 1997. And one year I was, had an opportunity to teach some new classes for staff. And I thought, well, what can I do? What new can I come up with? And it occurred to me in that moment, in contemplating that all three of these different streams were all part of one greater thing. And so then at that point, I started consciously combining them.
So a real merging of the spiritual, the energetic, and the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, and I found that in working with Sarah, that it was all sound work, and she didn't call herself a shaman, but it was really a shamanic approach to sound. She was not concerned too much with the science. It was very experiential. We're going into the sound. In fact, the first time I went, she lived about 2 hours from me, and classic case, another case of when you're ready, the teacher appears. Colin appeared literally, manifested, through a doorway in an instant, and then some years later, I was invited to teach a hand drumming workshop at a Sacred Arts Retreat Week at the Abode of the Message, which is a Sufi community in upstate New York, and for a very long time was also the headquarters of the Sufi Order of the West that was founded by Hazrat Inyat Khan, which also amongst sound healers, many of us know of his writings, and they're highly recommended. And so this community, his son Pir Vilat Inyat Khan, I think that's the name properly, that was his headquarters in America. And so I was invited to teach offer a drumming workshop at a week-long Sacred Arts Week. And at that week, Sarah was there. Sarah Benson was there doing sound healing workshop. And that's where I met her. I didn't know who she was prior to that. And that was yet another case of when you're ready, the teacher appears, because after she attended my workshop, I attended hers. And then afterwards, she said that she thought I was ready to come and study with her. And I was like, okay. And that first time when I went to her house for just a one day, all day, introductory practice, we arrived and in the morning, and there was either 9 other people or I was one of 9. I don't remember. But we were all sitting in her room in a circle, and she said, "Okay, now let's begin." And everyone, one by one, introduce yourself and then sound. And I was like, oh crap. Well, let me step back a moment on this story. I was on the phone with her some days prior, getting directions and details of anything when to show up. And I said, so what do you want me to bring? And she said, oh, you don't need to bring anything. And I said, oh, okay. Then I guess you have the instruments or whatever. This is. She says, oh, no, this isn't about instruments. This is all about your voice. And I said, I don't use my voice, not with music and sound. And she laughed and she said, oh, you will.
You're about to, yeah.
Yeah, you're about to. So it was through her that I learned that what I consider to be the real core essence if you're doing sound work is needing to work with your voice.
Mm.
And we can go into that more, but just to continue the story I began there, that first day with her, she said, okay, introduce yourself and then sound individually, one by one, in this room of 9 or 10 people. And so people would say, introduce themselves, and then they would just tone and sound and let the sound come out in a very free form way. And I was at least halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way around the circle, but as it gets closer and closer, you start getting more and more nervous.
Mm-hmm.
I think many of us have experienced this
Yeah.
sort of thing. Yeah, and then when it's, by the time it comes to the person next to you, you're not even like listening to what's going on
Oh, yeah.
anymore. You're all in your head
Yep.
about what am I going to do,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's my turn, and then you're there, and it's like either faint and die, or you just step up and here's the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The moment is now. And so I did, and I just sounded, and stuff came out that I never had done before.
Mm.
And it was just a matter of being completely present in the moment with what you are and what you feel, and allowing that to be expressed through sound and letting it come out.
Mm.
And so her work was very shamanic
Mm-hmm.
in working with the voice. And yeah, ask me another question. I could go on and on with that.
Well, I was just thinking, yeah, I mean, really what you've created, I think you call it something like shamanic sound medicine. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So, yeah, it's really this combination of all these influences for you. I'm wondering, with the hundreds of instruments or more that you have, what would it be like to go to one of your performances? Do you have a plan, or do you just see what you're guided to play and to sing, or what kind of things do you combine together for those?
Well, yeah. Um, I probably don't have hundreds of instruments, but I may have about 100.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's if you count every drum, every different kind of drum
Mm.
as a single instrument. So I'm not that, you know, there may be only like a dozen different types of instruments that I
Mm-hmm.
play regularly. But when I do my events, the way it has been happening in recent years is I have one gong, I have a whole bunch of really nice antique Himalayan bowls, and I have Native American flutes. I have some different drums. I have the dousongoni, which is a six-stringed West African harp lute. Um, there's a piece of music that I recently posted on my YouTube
Oh,
channel, and
yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
That's excellent.
so
Yeah.
that instrument that starts that's kind of like a bass instrument, bass pentatonic kind of funky bass groove instrument. That's the dousongoni.
And that song is Where Paths of Power Meet. Is that?
Yes,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which yeah, the title is certainly taken from or influenced by the Castaneda books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's probably a chapter in one of the books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I have that. I have sanza, which are African plucked instruments, kalimba and bira, that kind of thing. Various shakers and percussion and melodica
Mm-hmm.
and maybe another thing or two. Oh, the bouzouki, which is a Greek long-necked mandolin. And then, of course, not to be forgotten, which I almost forgot, is the Cosmi-Sonic Trance Banjo,
Mm-hmm.
um, which you can also find several nice videos of that
Will you describe
on,
that?
on yeah, yeah. Well, for one thing, go to YouTube and put in my name in Cosmi-Sonic Trance Banjo and find my YouTube channel. And
Mm-hmm.
there's, I think, at least 4 different videos of me playing that. One of them filmed really nicely, professionally filmed in the Omega Sanctuary,
Mm.
so you can see it, see what it is. But I'll describe it for your listeners. It's a banjo, but connected to the banjo to the bridge are 2 springs, 2 very long, approximately ½ inch diameter springs, and they're connected to the bridge, and then they fan out about 8 to 10 feet away to where they're connected to the center of two frame drums attached to tripods. So this sets up this loop of echo and reverb, very naturally acoustically created, no electronics. So you get this very cosmic sonic effect on the banjo, and it's a reverb, a very lush reverb, but it's also an echo, and it's also this kind of flanging phasing effect that you get on it as well. So it's like a three-channel multi-effects processor done entirely without electronics, and creates just a certain kind of sound that I work with. So I use that a lot in the in my sound work and in my events. In fact, I'm just pulling out a sheet of paper right now that happens to be on my desk, and that was a quote from somebody at Omega last summer, and I was going to put this on my website. Haven't done it yet, but she says, "It feels like you're sitting in the center of the universe." So, because when I do it, not when I'm doing events. You know, if I'm doing an event for a room full of whether it's 10 people or 100 people, it's just there in the room. If I'm doing it in a large event at Omega or elsewhere, it may be mic'd through the PA. But when I'll set up outdoors, like when I'm at Omega, I'll set up in the garden, and then people can come and sit in the middle, in between the that V-shaped setup with the springs and the banjo and the resonators, so you can be right in the middle of it. So I use all of these things in my sound medicine, and yes, I don't have an agenda. You know, if I do, I went through a period for a while where I would often think beforehand that, oh, hey, I have this idea, I'll start with this instrument or I'll start with that instrument. So there would be just that thought to pre-planning, but one of the real essential things to do this work, I think, with any kind of sound healing, you know, if you're really going to do it, is to show up and be present without an agenda. Is to really learn to feel what's being called for in the moment, to listen to spirit, to listen to energy. If you're working with one person, to really listen and tune into where that person's at. If I'm doing it for an event, then you just tune into the collective, the whole, the day, the evening, the weather, the room, and clear your mind, and then let the sound speak. So whenever I had that idea that, oh, I'm going to start with this instrument, as soon as I sat down and then I cleared my mind and I tuned in and I do what I do internally to call in, you know, spirit and ask for that guidance, without fail, it was always something other than what I was thinking. You know. So I've gotten to where I've dropped that entirely now. I don't even bother to waste my time thinking that I'm going to do something.
Just have it all set up and use whatever. Yeah.
And in the course of an evening, you know, I often will do an intro piece. Like I'll just play the Cosmi-Sonic Banjo for 5 or 10 minutes as an intro. Then I'll talk, and then I'll go into the full-on sound medicine journey, which can take anywhere, usually from about 50 minutes to an hour and a half, somewhere in that range. And yes, if you've been to a number of my events, you'll know that I do play the gong and the bowls and the dousongoni and the flutes and the drums all get an airing in the course of that experience. Some instruments don't get played. You know, the sanza or the bouzouki, sometimes they get played, sometimes they don't. In what I do on the instruments, the way that the order that I do them in, you know, the music that comes through is always unique in the moment.
Yeah. So
I don't have compositions that I play on the bowls, for instance. Or,
right.
You know.
So every time would be much different from the next. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and very importantly, left this out. I use my voice.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Sarah was right, and her work, her training. I ended up working with her for about 10 years until she passed and left the earthly realm. But for 10 years, I worked with her and both studied with her, but also became part of a trio with her and myself and Jim Ballard, another friend of ours, and we would do what she would call sounding celebrations.
Hmm.
And they would be events, sound healing events, and we'd work together as a trio of sound shaman. And and she would also play instruments. She played flute, piano, had conch shells and metal bowls and drum and shakers. So she used all those things, but the work came, the practice came through the voice. And so yes, I use that a lot in my sounding work, and and it continues to open. It's opened, so much is opened up through my voice, through doing this work, and continues to do so.
And is it usually, um, again, in the moment, maybe you're toning with an instrument? Is there ever a particular language that you're called to sing, or
No,
yeah?
yes, yes, and no. Yes,
Yeah.
it's in the moment, and it's often with an instrument. It can be with a drum, can be with the shakers. I can be toning or sounding with the bowls and the gong. With the dousongoni, almost invariably, if I get something happening on the dousongoni, I'll bring the voice in, and it's all very in the moment. I and it's really reflective of where I'm at in that moment too. Just the weather, what I've been doing that day. My voice can have a lot of range of, it can be very limited or seemingly limited to me, or it can have a lot more expression in terms of melody
Mm.
and tone. And one of the things about doing this way, even when I think my voice is really off and I'm just sort of croaking sounds, it's not very particularly musical. And that itself is another thing. It doesn't have to be musical. This isn't about singing your favorite song or being an opera singer or something. It's about tuning into presence and allowing it to be
Mm-hmm.
sounded, which may or may not be musical. Um, but wherever it's at, even when I feel like I'm not really on with my voice, I'll always get people afterwards that tell me how amazing my voice was. And I think, what are you listening to? you know, were you really listening to me? Were you, I mean, that's my self criticism that comes
Mm-hmm.
in and thinks, oh, really? But I've come to accept that. I don't, I, I mean, incredibly grateful for anybody who has that experience and tells me that,
Mm.
um, because I don't always perceive it that way.
Well, before we move on a bit to talk about kind of the current state of sound healing field, maybe just mention a little bit about, we did mention one song from your new album, but anything you want to mention about your recordings or collaborations with people that you've worked on?
Sure. Well, we mentioned meeting Colin, who was one of my idols, and I ended up studying with him for about 10 months until he went on the road again and never came back. And I would go out to his house and study. And that first time when I was going out there, and I was on the phone with him, I asked him how much it would cost for a lesson.
Mm.
And he said, oh, somewhere between zero and $1 million. And he didn't take any money from me.
Mm.
And and about halfway into it, one day, I was out there and we ended up going out into his garden, and I was helping him with a little gardening. And I said, so Colin, I'm happy to pay you whenever, let me know. And he just said, I'll let you know when you're ready to start paying me,
Hmm.
which he never did.
Yeah.
Um, that leads in, so there's one. And then I ended up, uh, when I was doing my Earth Spiral Water Sound album, I had a song that lyric song that needed a woman's vocal on it, and I had friends and knew people and connected with people in my general upstate New York area, uh, and was trying different people out singing the song, and nobody was really doing what I heard. And I said to one of my friends, I said to her, do you know anybody that sounds like Joanne Shenandoah? Joanne being this Native American singer, Grammy-winning
Mm-hmm.
Native American singer. She sang at um, Bill Clinton's inaugural balls. She's, like the leading voice in the Native American scene. And so this friend said, "Well, why don't you ask Joanne?" And I was like, yeah, great idea. Why didn't I think of that? I just assumed she was, lived far away and, you know, whatever. And so I emailed her through the wonders of the internet. I was
Mm-hmm.
able to email her, and she wrote back and said, well, send me the track and I'll let you know. And turns out she lives in upstate New York, about an hour and a half away from me. And and then she said yes.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me, she said, I usually don't do these kind of things, but my husband and my daughter thought it was, a really good song and convinced me to do it.
Cool. Wow. Hmm.
So that's another one. And then on that same album, I got Daevid Allen, who was probably my two biggest musical influence idols from teenage years on were Daevid Allen of the band Gong. He was the founder, co-founder, leader of the psychedelic art rock band Gong, which is very much a European band,
Mm-hmm.
British, French, Australian, and he he's really, if you know that music and you know of that band, he was really a leading light in that realm, and they were one of the most influential bands in that whole realm of psychedelic art rock. And then Jon Anderson, the visionary vocalist of the band Yes, and again through the wonders of the internet, I got to study, or not study, but to work with both of them, to record, to create music, and David I had in the studio in Woodstock as well as doing things remotely. But we did a number of pieces. There's probably about seven, I think, four pieces on one album, two on another, and then another piece on one of David's albums that I played on that we created together. And then working with Jon Anderson, and all of these come about by having the intention at some point to work with these people, developing my own work to the point where I feel confident to present it to them, and then having them say, "Hey, yeah, sure,
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Yeah.
do that." They're humans too.
Mm-hmm. All you have to do is ask.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's get into, kind of why we've connected through sound healing and, of course, these online communities. You run the Sound Healing Forum, which is a website online, and I see you, of course, share things on some Facebook groups that are all about sound healing. So let's get into the current state of the sound healing field, why it seems like it's um, such a buzzword and buzz topic right now, and maybe some goals that you have about clarifying certain things, um, using discernment and judgment when it comes to just a lot of information that comes out about sound healing that might not quite be right.
Hmm. Dangerous,
Where
dangerous
do we
subject.
start? Yeah.
This could be my downfall. The whole interview could go off course here. um, yeah. Well, I have this thing about integrity
Mhm.
in what we say and what we do, and being informed about that as well. So that we can then have an integrity that's based on on valid information and valid experience. And um, so I tend to be, I suppose, a somewhat prominent voice through these forums for this and for dispelling a lot of the fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
to use a gentle word. uh, so yes, sound healing is becoming a very common buzzword these days, or phrase. Sound therapy. Um, there's arguments about what to call it exactly. I'm not really too hung up on that. As you mentioned earlier, I call what I do these days shamanic sound medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and and that term may, I think applies to what I do, but it may not apply to what someone else does. So it's more than just one thing, and it's great that it's becoming known. I think it's a very vital and palpable form of energy medicine. Um, it's there's different forms of energy medicine, and they all work with the idea of energy and vibration. But a lot of them, like Reiki, there's a form of energy medicine, and it's very popular. But you can't with Reiki, and this is nothing at all against it. I practice it a little bit. I have friends who are master practitioners, and but you can't control the energy in the same way that you can with sound. With sound, you can control the frequency, the harmony, the vibration, the intensity, the volume, all these parameters you can learn to control and move through in different ways. So for me, um, not that I have any bias towards sound. I mean, I have a huge bias towards sound, being a musician.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think it's a very potent, very powerful, and very consciously controllable form of energy medicine. So it's great that it's becoming more known, and many people are getting into it, and it's spreading around. And on the other hand, with things like that, they can also spread with a lot of misinformation
Mm-hmm.
and misunderstanding about what it really is to do sound healing work. So I think that is something that is very significant in the state. The current state of the sound healing world is there are a lot of people doing great work, and there are a lot of people doing things and saying things and putting things out there that simply aren't true, that are very misleading. A lot of it, I think, comes from just not knowing. There's a lot of ignorance. I know that word carries with it, negative connotations. If you call somebody ignorant, it's like an insult.
Mm.
But just, I don't, I just, what I mean is just not knowing about something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be an insult. You're just not deeply informed or really fully informed about something. And, there are plenty of topics I'm ignorant on. Um, so, so yeah, a lot of that is just this misinformation gets spread around, and for a lot of people, it's just simply because they don't know. They've been told by prominent teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and so they think, okay, this is it, and it's really more the prominent teachers in the YouTube videos that spread this disinformation. That and I just use the word disinformation, differentiate between
Mm.
misinformation. I think they both exist. Misinformation, just having the wrong information and believing it's true. And then there's also disinformation, where it's intentionally false information being spread, which that probably bothers me the most,
Mm.
because I know there are people who know far better, and they know they're spreading false information.
Well, maybe, a good question is if somebody's getting into sound healing, they're reading books, they're going to classes, how do they know? How can they um, research in the best way or use discernment to even know if the information they have is um, of truth or not?
Yeah. Um, which is a really good question. There's both, I think, internal and external ways to approach that, both being necessary. And the external way is to seek out reputable sources. And I would basically claim two of those, or not claim them for myself, but name two of those. One is the Sound Healing Forum, which is an online forum that I host that you mentioned, and our intent there is to maintain that integrity. And there's self policing, I suppose, between myself and people like Mitch Noor and some others who have a real strong commitment to digging deep into whether something is true or not. So that's one resource where there's not a lot of ongoing activity there, but there's a really good supply of topics in research and exploration that comes from that place of integrity and study. And then also, which is much more active, is where I think we've met, is the Facebook page, The Art and Science of Sound Healing, in which Thomas or Anderson runs, with the same kind of commitment to wisdom and integrity and science and validation. So there's that. Those are two great resources, for external study, for looking deeper into things. And then there's the internal thing of really going in and feeling whether something is really happening or not. If somebody tells you that 741 is a healing frequency, and they make a YouTube video with all about 741 hertz, are you really, tune in and see if you really feel some kind of special energy or magic in that 741 hertz tone that you don't feel in 740 or 739 or 742.
Sure.
And I think if you really legitimately look at a lot of these things with a healthy skepticism, and with that kind of discernment, and skepticism isn't just closing the door on something, it's just going into something and saying, is this really true? Let me see for myself. Let me see what exactly are they saying, and let me consider the parameters around that. And I think you can discover a lot on your own that way.
That is really well put, the internal and external. I mean, there's such a need for research, validation, and data, but a lot of it is experiential. How does it make you feel? Does it shift you in some way? Is just as important. Yeah.
And a lot of the things that I think are false information, that can shift you as well. You can listen to a 528 thing, 528 supposedly being the frequency of love. Well, there is absolutely zero information in any way, scientific or otherwise, to support that claim. And it does not appear in any ancient text or anything. But that is one of the things that is, propagated. But if you just listen to a 528 hertz tone, are you feeling love emanating and arising in your heart from that tone? And maybe you do.
Yeah.
But then try it with a 527 hertz tone.
Yeah.
Try it with 666. The devil's number, or 616. Depending on what version of the Bible you look at, it's 616. But try that frequency, and better yet, have someone play those frequencies for you without you knowing what they are. Because we can all go into any of these things with the power of suggestion. And so take that out and have somebody play those frequencies for you without telling you what they are, and see what you feel.
Right, and that just kind of shines the light on intention. If you say this particular frequency is for this purpose, well, then you have that intention in mind for using it for that way.
Right, yeah, and that's what I meant to get out there and didn't really complete my thought.
No, yeah, exactly. exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
that there is that effect. So you may have an effect with 528 or some other frequency, or music that's made with those frequencies that claim to have them in there somewhere in the music,
Mm.
buried in the music are those frequencies. Um, but right, the intent that you go into it with and the effect and power of sound may have a very influential and positive effect on you, but it's also an effect that will happen with quite a few other frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
I am very much an anti-frequencyist. I'm
Yeah.
not into frequencyism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, we may have even coined that term. Uh, we didn't coin the tone, but we coined the term frequencyism
Frequency. Yeah.
in,
Mm-hmm.
in, in discussion at the art and science page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, one time Thomas and I were having a discussion, and we conducted research that determined that 92.8% of all information in the sound healing world is false,
Yikes.
um,
Mm.
including that figure.
Right. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. How could you really calculate
right.
that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Oh, I think we could probably do a whole podcast on this topic in particular, but I think, for now, I was just thinking how um, apt your name is, Rich, because your music is so rich, your life and your all the work you've done is very rich, and I encourage people to seek out your work, your recordings, go to YouTube, write in Rich Goodhart. But also, people that want to meet you and work with you in person. I know you have a retreat later this year in late September. Do you want to talk about that in case people are curious
yes,
about working
yes,
with
for
you?
sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, for one thing, sure, check out my YouTube videos, and but also the CDs.
Hmm.
I still have CDs. I still make CDs and
Good.
sell them to
Good.
some
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend them. Uh, I sometimes sell downloads, but I don't have anything up on iTunes or anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
But when people inquire and want a certain track, I will do an exchange, a PayPal exchange, and send them. And I recently just sent somebody 4 tracks from the new album,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, try to listen to them in order. And even then, it's unfortunate because you put them in your player, it's going to create a space between the tracks, and
Oh
a lot
yeah.
of the tracks flow together.
Mm-hmm.
The overlap or you know, the music ends up flowing into river sounds and water, and then that out of that another piece flows. So the CD experience is really the way this stuff was meant to be heard.
Mm.
It still comes from what we used to do back in the 70s when we would get together with friends and we just have listening parties. Like,
Mm.
hey, I'm going over to Dave's house tonight, and what we would do is go down in his room and spend 2 or 3 hours just listening to sides of albums.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know things have changed and people don't seem to do that as much.
Yeah.
Um, but how do I know what people do? But certainly in my realm and people I talk to, that's less of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, I highly encourage that. Due to the coronavirus, I've currently lost all of my spring and early summer work,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm out of a lot of work.
Yeah.
Um, so, if you buy my albums, it's one way to get. Events. Just last Friday, I had an event that was canceled. I have some things coming up canceled. But you can still get my music. It'll help me buy groceries,
Mm-hmm.
and you will get that sound experience. The last 2 albums I've created are both double CD albums. They're filled with a lot of music, and each of them have sound medicine journeys on them that you can go deeply into the sound with. Um, and hopefully, if things improve enough that Omega was scheduled to open on May 8th, and right now it's been pushed back to June 29th.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah, 2 months of the season have already been canceled,
Yeah.
and like everybody, it's we don't know really if or when it will open.
Mm-hmm.
But if things go well and they're able to open, I will be teaching there in July for a couple of weeks. I do a lot of teaching on staff there. I've had 9 weeks this year scheduled. I've already lost 4 of those weeks. Um, but where I teach Qigong on a daily basis, and then at different times in the day or evening, I will do sound medicine, shamanic sound medicine events for the whole community, or I'll be doing classes for staff or for the R&R guests. And but the big thing is the catalog workshop, which you mentioned in the end of September, September 25th to 27th, and it'll be my 3rd year for doing this, where it's a weekend retreat. It's in the Omega catalog. You can get that online, going to eomega.org. You can go to my website, richgoodhart.com, spelled richgoodhart.com, and find information there on description of this retreat and registering information. So hopefully that will happen, and if it does, that is the ideal way to experience my work and to study with me. Um, on the forums, I will get into a lot of information, a lot of intellectual work, because we're dealing with that medium of the written word. So on the forums that we mentioned in the Facebook pages, you can find my 20 true sound healing truths. You can find my articles on 432, on Schumann resonances and all that. But in the workshop, it's very little of that. I address that as much as people have questions and want me to address things like that. But the far great majority of the workshop really draws on what I did with Sarah in a lot of ways. It's very experiential. We're using our voices, we're going into sound, and I'm mixing it up with doing my sound medicine journeys, where it's a passive receptive thing, where we do a ceremonial deep sound medicine journey. Excuse me, to enter into the sound in the way that I can lead that through my work, which again draws on Qigong, draws on shamanism, draws on sound healing, draws on being a musician for 40 years. All of that goes into creating my sound medicine, and then even more than that, we spend really working together in ways that we can only really do live in person.
Mm-hmm.
I've resisted. People have asked me about doing. Everybody's doing things online now, moving online because of the virus.
Yeah.
And I would like to do that. And the only reason I don't is because what I do is so much more potent, so much more juicy and alive
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when you're gathering together in a room together.
Yeah. Yep. It's tricky. The online it does take away so much, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my friends, Lana Ryder, who you probably know
Yeah.
through the
Mm-hmm.
through the forum, she came 2 years ago to the workshop at Omega, and at my page on my website for this, you can go to a page where I have about 8 or 10 testimonials from people who have taken the workshop, so you can get their you know one of the better ways to understand what the experience is like is to see what other people are saying about it than having me try to tell you what it
Mm-hmm.
is about. But she, not too long ago, posted on somewhere where I had posted about the workshop at Omega. It's still on, as far as we know. It's scheduled to go forward, um, depending on the virus. But she said, what's really wonderful is do all these online things now. Study, read,
Mm-hmm.
get the information you can from these online people, and then take all that and let's gather together
Yeah.
at Omega with Rich,
Yep.
and then take all of that and give it some real live immersion and expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once we're all able to get together in person again, it'll be that much more powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Gosh, is there anything that you were really hoping to focus on that we that we didn't, or any last things you want to announce?
Anything that we didn't cover? I don't think so, but all these subjects, we could probably spend an hour on each of them, or another hour on each of them. So there's always things within, when I get off the phone, I think, oh, we started talking about that, but then I never completed that thought, and oh, people are going to draw this conclusion about me because I said that, but then I didn't follow it up with more clarity on it. So that always happens. I will say if people do have questions about anything I've said, or you can always contact me on Facebook or on the Art and Science Forum or the Sound Healing Network Forum, where I'm one of the administrators there, or at the Sound Healing Forum, which I would give the website of. It's not that simple. It's soundhealingforum.discussion.community.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know why it has to be that and not just dot something with 3 letters.
Yeah, I never noticed that. Huh. Yeah.
Oh, and about the voice thing, even last year when I did the workshop in Omega, I had people say to me, oh, I didn't realize we were going to use our voice that much. Well, I do put it in the description. It's not the only thing we do. And everybody who comes and doesn't realize it, that's actually a good thing, because a lot of people I found will not do things because of the fear around their voice.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so it's actually better if you don't. Forget what I just said. It's actually the workshop's not about the voice at all. But if you happen to show up and you find yourself confronted with using your voice, there is a step, and it's something we do on the first day, or the morning of the second day, actually. I do this practice, and people will have incredible fear around it, but then they step up, and it's just like taking that step. The steps are right there, and you're afraid to take the step, but you just take that step. Like I mentioned that first time with Sarah, it's not as, what I do is not as fear-inducing as what she did to me. But just taking that step, and it's amazing what happens. And things open up, and your whole sense of self and confidence shifts profoundly.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you just have to lean into it in order to let go of the fear. Yeah.
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 And I'll one last thing I'll say as well, one of several last things, is that there's an essay that Sarah wrote that I included in my first book, which is out of print, but that essay is also at my website, and it's by Sarah, and it's called "Freeing the Voice, Sounding the Soul." And then in a very short, on paper it's like 2 pages. She covers, for me, she covers more potent, more vital essence than what some people cover in an entire book. And the opening line of that essay is, I may not quote this quite right, but it's approximately, there is no place to hide in the sound of your voice. And as I mentioned earlier with my own voice, when I'm doing events, depends on where I'm at that day. My voice can cover, this morning I have congestion in my throat, and I was trying to clear it out before I got on with the phone with you. And that's just what it is now. It reveals, it reflects your fears, your joys, your hopes, your love, your anger, whatever's going on with you, it's reflected in your voice. But that's something to be embraced and gone into with open arms and really explore. And in doing so, in approaching that aspect of sound healing, which is not always addressed in sound healing trainings, to me, that is the most vital, essential element.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been great. It's just flown by too. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories and experiences, and I'm excited for people to hear this.
Well, thank you again for having me on.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. It's always an honor. Uh, you know, many of these forums, I see certain guests and I go, wow, they're having that person on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, oh, I never look at myself and go, oh, wow, I'm on. So it's really, it's just, it's an honor to be asked to do this sort of thing.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. As you know, I too am so inspired by world music, and I just love that you've followed your passion, and it's truly limitless once you find that passion and inspiration. So, thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sound Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. Check things out on Facebook at Sounds Heal Studio, and you can listen to all previous podcasts as well as music meditations on the YouTube channel at Sounds Heal Studio. Be well and stay tuned.